Damn, I feel like painting a mini.
A couple of years ago, I started getting into D&D. As my passion for D&D grew, so did my collection of minis. And like many others out there, I now have boxes of shame. This is me painting every single one of my miniatures.
Hi folks, my name is Leif and this is my YouTube channel called Devs and Dice. It's been a while since I painted a proper D&D miniature for this channel, so I figured why not give it a shot. The mini I will be painting today is the Garghuk Ogre Chieftain from Reaper Bones Black series. This mini really spoke to me and I felt inspired to paint it. So without further ado, let's get cracking.
Okay, so here it is, the wonderful Garghuk Ogre Chieftain. Now I was surprised that there wasn't a lot of mold lines, and I actually did miss one of them, but all in all I have to say this was a really nice miniature. I started out with priming it black, and this I did because I wanted to challenge myself this time. And in that vein, I started using my scale 75 paints. I'm coming in with Tindalos Red first, just to sort of get a nice warm base coat. Once I have that color on the palette, I'm also adding a little bit of peanut butter, a scale 75 color, and I'm really blending these two colors together just to get sort of a nice graduation. And here I'm trying to build up the midtones and, well, eventually the highlights. So I'm just mixing this and adding more and more, well, peanut butter to the mix. Now, working with these new paints from scale 75, it was quite a challenge because I can't really explain it. They flow out super nicely, but they didn't cover that well always. I mean, they had the same pigmentation. Here I'm adding a little bit of Lilith Yellow to the palette, and I'm again making a mix of this and peanut butter just to get more and more gradually, you know, brighter highlights. Now at this point I am starting to glaze over the deepest shadows because they were a little bit too aggressive. And here I'm doing the same thing actually with the highlights. I'm just trying to sort of homogenize, you know, them into being the same color range a little bit more. So I'm coming in over with some peanut butter, I think. It's a mix essentially between these three colors that I've had on the palette so far. So this painting project was a little bit about getting back into the saddle, but it was also a lot about challenging oneself. And one thing I've never done really is to use my airbrush on a small miniature such as this. Now I'm coming in with a different mix of the colors that I've used previously just to sort of smooth things over. And I'm really doing this in a glaze-like consistency. So very, very thin colors just to sort of smoothen it out. I've seen firsthand how Rogland from Rogland Studios does his you know, miniatures, and he uses an airbrush quite a lot just to smoothen everything out. So here I'm trying to increase the brightness, and as you can see, I think I went a little bit overboard with the brightness there, so I'm coming back in and glazing back in that warmth a little bit more and a little bit more sort of yellow skin. Now this to me looked good, but I wanted some more warmth. I wanted this to be a red-blooded creature. So I'm coming in with Bloodfest Crimson. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start glazing into this sort of all the creases everywhere where I imagine that, okay, here you can start to see, you know, the blood flowing a little bit more. So all of the shadows, because I wanted to work with my color theory a little bit and make it, you know, the colors contrast from the midtones and the highlights. Make it a little bit more visually interesting. And for some reason, I got a little bit of a weird white fingerprint there, and I think it is from me creating a base from Super Sculpey. Now, in regards to his club, I'm coming with some chestnut brown and then some arbuckle brown. And what I'm really doing here is I'm just wet blending it. So I'm looking at the sort of accidental zenithal prime that happened when I airbrushed, and I'm pretty much just, wet blending it in, working quickly. And that's actually an advantage with these colors from Scale 75. I perceive them, you have more time to do wet blends for some reason. And it was super easy. It's simply, define your highlight, define your shadow, and then just, work with it. So just to give the wood some more details, I'm coming in with some Beastie Brown from Vallejo, just adding a little bit of that wood groove to it. At this point, I am going to use that Arbuckle Brown, which was a sort of reddish brown, and I'm going to start defining his, I guess his fur tunic or whatever you call it. And I'm using this primarily on the shadowy bits. And then I'm using the other chestnut brown for the more sort of lighter areas on his tunic. And that's what it looks like once it's dry. Now I'm adding some guncore brown and leather brown to the palette. Now this, before you go ahead and do anything, you can skip this step because I tried this out first and, I did my base coat, my edge highlighting, all of that jazz. But I actually, in the end, repainted over this because, like I said, I wanted to challenge myself and I didn't think that it really gave a nice impression because the character in itself is very warm in tones and I wanted, if possible, to get a more sort of cold brown. So I went with chocolate brown, which I've always felt like is a dark, rich brown, but it's not very warm. I'm not sure if my eyes are deceiving me or not, but it felt like at least there was a visual difference. So I basically went back and then redid the highlights again. And this is actually what it looks like now with the chocolate brown and me starting out with the highlights on all of the leather bits. Now the actual pouch there, I used several of the brown colors, but basically wet blending in some shadows and some highlights. Now for this one I used a dark gray for his hair and his facial hair. I used also just plain black for all of his toenails, fingernails. Now adding a little bit of off-white, I can mix that up to a brighter hue of gray. So I am just putting in some basic highlights on his hair and his beard. Some leather brown, I think it is used for the leather straps on his club. Now mixing up some of those colors, I of course can create gray, so that rock which he has in his belt, I'm just penciling in, the midtones, the highlights and the shadows. Now for the bag I'm using, and for the highlights actually, I just created a brighter version of the colors I essentially had by mixing them with that off-white color. It's a very handy color to have on your wet palette whenever you want to mix to a brighter, color. The teeth get the same treatment basically. You've seen me do this before. Go in with a darker bone color, then brighter and brighter and brighter. And all of this I could mix by just using, the paints I already had. Now for the skulls, I wanted to come in with a skeleton color specifically. So I came in with Jackbone from P3. Once that had dried, I am highlighting with essentially a brighter version that I mixed myself using the off-white. And then once that had dried, I'm covering the skeletal parts with some strong tone from Army Painter. I'm also going to use this strong tone just to get some definition on all of the ropes and straps he has around his midsection and his hands. Now at this point, I think that, well yeah, one small detail. I painted the eyes in with just that off-white, then I actually did paint in pupils. But the weirdest thing happened, or it's not weird at all, giving him pupils made him vulnerable. So I didn't like that, so I actually re-added just white eyes, because I felt like he looked more badass that way. Here I'm using some gunmetal gray for that hairband, but at this point the miniature is pretty much all painted. Here I'm pretty much just using all of the colors I have in my wet palette to cover that white that the Super Sculpty base has as a you know, from start. Now I went with some shredded coconut fibers for the basing. So I'm just adding some super glue, using Gorilla Super Glue, and then sprinkling over some of that nice flocking. It really gives a nice sort of foresty feel. Now just to make sure that I sort of have enough of that to hide the seam on the base that was on the miniature originally, I'm adding a little bit more of super glue. And now here I'm adding a little bit of IPA alcohol, and then I'm sealing everything with some diluted PVA glue. Once that had dried, it was time to come in back with some tufts. Now I'm using woodland tufts and meadow flowers for this. But I think at this point it's time to look at how the final result turned out.
Alright guys, so that was how I painted up Garghuk, the Ogre Chieftain from Reaper Bones. I really like this model, and it has a special meaning to me. The last miniature that I painted was the Red Dragon, which is now like 2 months ago. So I was a little bit rusty and also a little bit scared. But thankfully, I think everything worked out well in the end. So what did you think about the paint job? Please tell me in the comment section down below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe, and please feel free to share this video with any of your friends that might find this interesting. Alright, with that, I want to thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome day, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.